All right, I'm back with another Planeswalker review. This time we're doing Chandra, Hope's Beacon. We have so many mono red Planeswalkers in this game now, so we got to figure out which ones are the best to pick up. Well, mono red isn't necessarily a must-have color to deal with. I mean, I guess if you're in the very beginning and you just need a red walker to get you through story mode or something like that, there are planeswalkers that might be worth picking up for mana because you're going to be using them frequently in the rest of your time playing this game. Does Chandra Hope's Beacon live up to that task put to her? Well, we'll find out here. So first thing we gotta do, gotta just look at her stats, right? She's got 105 hit points, which is kind of average. Her abilities there we'll get to, and then her mana bonuses. So she's got +5 on red, which is respectable, +4 on green, which is also pretty good, and then +3 on black, which makes for a pretty decent mana spread there. Then she's got -1 and -2 on blue and white. So definitely avoid trying to match white gems. I always forget when I'm playing, like, okay, which monocolor walker has good mana gains on what color. Keeping track of that can be kind of hard to do sometimes, especially if you're switching between walkers all the time like I am. But if that's not an issue for you, then don't even worry about it. But anyhow, her mana bonuses are pretty decent in that regard. Would have liked just slightly more mana bonus on red, but you know, that's just being nitpicky. It's fine. Her deck limits. So she can put up to 6 creatures, 8 spells, and 5 supports. Chandra's always get a lot of slots for spells, so nothing new there, but still, you want to be able to load up on spells when you're using mono red most of the time. So she does well for that. I think slinging a lot of spells is kind of the domain of red a lot of time. Doesn't always have to be, but especially when you think of Chandra, you think of her slinging spells and stuff, so makes sense for her to get that many spells. And then 5 supports is enough for my purposes, but would an extra one have hurt? Nah, probably not. But, you know, I have no complaints here. Talk about her abilities now. Controlled Destruction is her passive ability. So expend 9, destroy a block of 3 by 3 gems. If you don't remember what expend does, it triggers when you cast a card of that number or more. So if you cast a 9 mana spell, 10 mana spell, 11 mana spell, it only triggers once a turn, though. That's the main weakness with expend for me. If expend wasn't capped at 1 per turn, I would have liked that mechanic a lot more. So you'll see how that ends up factoring into my just overall review of her as we go. But it's a pretty decent passive ability. Sometimes you want to be destroying blocks, sometimes you don't. I think it's overall been a net positive, destroying those blocks of gems. There are a lot of cards that you can take advantage of with that. And we'll get into that in my deck showcases, so hold tight for that. Flame Reaction. Ability 1, 7 loyalty, create 4 combustion flame tokens. And what are the combustion flame tokens? They are a support, 1 shield. Although if the point of these tokens is to destroy them, I don't know why they need to be reinforced. That would have been amazing if they made these not reinforced so you could have 4 of these on the board at a time. That would have been maybe an overpowered ability, but still would have been very fun. So when you expend, destroy this support. And when this support is destroyed, gain X mana. X is the number of red gems on the board. I put a little asterisk on it because what I found is this support only gains you mana when destroyed if it's you who destroyed it with expend. So that should be fixed or, you know, reworded to reflect that. You can get a lot of mana from this ability. It is pretty powerful in that way. You definitely want to stack the board to be getting you lots of mana. when you destroy this. So you're going to want to put some red gem converters into your deck. It's a pretty effective ability most of the time. And at 7 loyalty, it's not super cheap, but you can get it on the board pretty reliably. So every other turn, I would say you get a chance to have this on the board. And yeah, you can get a decent amount of mana from it. Intensive Heat. Ability 2, 9 loyalty. Deal X damage to the first opposing creature. X is the greatest mana cost among spell cards in your graveyard. In order for this ability to be really effective, you want to have some high cost spells in your deck so that when you actually use this ability, it destroys the creature you're trying to deal damage to. So that's something to keep in mind. And it is dealing X damage. You got to be careful when using it against something like Phyrexian Vindicator, which could just throw all that damage back to you. So it's a very niche ability. It saved me a couple times, but it's not where I want to focus spending my loyalty points on. So it's my least favorite ability of hers. It's fine. It does the job most of the time, but you rather just have a removal spell ready instead, I think. Unless you're playing an event where the objective is to deal damage to your opponent's creatures. But other than that, don't love it. And then Skyfire, ability 3, 18 loyalty. Create 4 fiery reclamation tokens. And what do those do? They are a support enchantment, 3 shields. When you cast a card that costs 9 or more mana for the first time each turn, deal X damage to your opponent's Planeswalker. X is that card's cost. Then this support loses 1 shield. So it's pretty much expend 9. That's really just how expend works. So that's what we're doing here. Deal X damage to your opponent's Planeswalker. This ability can help speed up a win. But again, it's one of those things where if you could trigger it more than once a turn, it would be so much better. 3 times a turn would be great. You'd be winning games so much faster. And yeah, I feel like this Planeswalker overall has a lot of potential that doesn't quite get over the hump for me. Like someone like Jaya Fiery Negotiator or even Jaya Ballard, the first one, you can really chain off a bunch of spells with their abilities and quickly dispatch your opponent. And even Raw Leyline Prodigy has an ability that triggers as many times as you can cast a spell as you want. Same with Raw Is It Viceroy. So I feel like this ability underperforms compared to those. So she's just kind of a budget version of those Planeswalkers, and her abilities just aren't as good as those Planeswalkers. So she's not bringing a lot of unique ability to the table, unfortunately. Her abilities are relatively unique, especially her passive and her first ability. I think those are where her strength really lies. Like I said, her passive ability is fun, and it's good at destroying simple supports and activated gems. Beyond that, yeah, like I was just talking about, an oppressive cap on abilities. I would have loved to see these capped maybe at 3 times a turn. Her hit points are pretty average, and she's mono red. So I think her abilities, if they were in a Planeswalker that was, say, black and red or white and red or something like that, I think that would have made her much more unique and stood out a lot more in the pool of walkers that we have, because her being mono red with her abilities being just okay and not that different from what we've seen before just makes her kind of average. But, you know, I still had fun with her, and I will show you the decks that I used to have fun. All right, so for this first deck, I really just wanted to see if I could create a deck that doesn't have any mythics and can hold its own in training grounds and whatnot. Because, yeah, you can definitely win with all the most broken cards in red in standard right now. But I wanted to see if she can hold her own with just okay cards in a collection. And I think this deck in particular did pretty well. There are things going for it that help with her abilities. So when I was deciding on what creatures to use, I went with ones that will give you card advantage. What I found is when I didn't have a way to gain more cards in my hand, I was just running out of cards to even put mana into a lot of times. So that told me that I needed more cards. So that's a tip for people who are building. If you find yourself putting a lot of cards that gain you mana into your deck, that's usually a good thing, but what tends to happen is if you overload on them, you end up with too much mana generation and not enough cards to put that mana in. So you want to balance there. And I think these creatures will do it for you. We got Breaches, Eager Pillager. When a pirate enters the battlefield under your control, creatures you control gain unblockable to end a turn. That's whatever. But really this one, at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a gold token, then draw a card. It gains 5 mana. So we're getting mana generation in the 5 mana and the gold token, and we're drawing a card. Next, we got Aurelia, the Law Above. You've probably seen this card in the wild. It's very popular now. You see it a lot. It's got a lot going for it. It's got haste. It's got flying and vigilance. It's 4/4 for a 15, which is, kind of average, even for a rare. But when a creature you control attacks, draw a card. So there we go. And then deal 6 damage to the first opposing creature and gain 6 life. So you're getting a lot out of this card just in general. This is why it's so popular. It does so much for you. And I think it's kind of just going to be a staple card as we go forward in the game for standard. So very good card, especially in the lower rarities, because it's giving you so much for one card. But I mostly chose it for the card draw, because if you have all 3 creatures attacking, that's 3 cards more in your hand just from that. And then our other creatures are giving us cards as well. And then Tai Joaquin, Perfect Shot. Not a creature I see used much, but I think she is maybe underrated. So she's 8 mana, 2/3. Kind of weak in that regard. But when an opposing creature is dealt damage during your turn, draw a card. So there are a lot of cards in this deck that are going to be able to do that for us. So that's pretty nice in that way. And then if that creature dies this turn, deal X damage to any opposing target. X is that creature's base toughness. So you're getting a little bit of extra power to hit our opponent with. So this card also does a decent amount of things for us. But, if you think that you don't need this card for extra draw, there are plenty of other cards at low rarities that are great. You got Kranko, which will really build up quickly and destroy lands. And there are a lot of lands that are worth destroying in standard right now. So definitely don't sleep on that card either. But yeah, you can go with whatever you want in this slot here. Then we got Hell to Pay. Good card for creating lots of gold tokens and doing more damage. So I think the name of the game with Chandra is really just trying to deal lethal damage to your opponent in as quick and efficient of a way as possible. So I do like Hell to Pay for that regard. Demolish. Like I was talking about, a lot of nasty supports in standard right now, and Demolish will take care of at least one of them. Unfortunately, it'll just target a token at random sometimes, so it's a bit unreliable in that regard. And if your opponent isn't playing very many supports, it kind of sits dead in your hand. So that is a reason I don't use Demolish myself a lot in most cases, but it is a really good card and it's always going to be available to you in whatever event you play it. Molten Collapse, just solid removal. Will take care of most things. Your opponent plays a Rakdos or Olimog or anything like that. Easy way to get rid of it. We got Boombox, which is a great card to pair with any Planeswalker who can destroy the battlefield reliably, destroying a bunch of activated gems and stuff. So it's got an activate 2 of destroying a random opposing card. And you'll be a little bit surprised at how often you're going to be triggering that boombox. So it's a really good card for just continuous removal. If you don't have a card like Rakdos or something like that to put into this type of deck, it's going to be a way to fairly reliably destroy your opponent's cards as you go. Cost-Fire of Resistance has been my main win con when I use this deck. As you can see, it's really all about that passive ability that it has. If the support has 7 or more shield, when a red gem is destroyed, deal 3 damage to your opponent's Planeswalker. So with all the things going on, and then we got Leyline of the Guild Pact and Cryptics making red gems all over the place. You're going to be destroying those red gems, creating a bunch of them, and just doing a lot of damage to your opponent in that way. So a lot of things that are happening here. We're relying on creatures for card advantage. Then we have a lot of cards to deal with things our opponent throws at us. We got about 4. Then we have a lot of cards to deal with things our opponent throws at us. We got about 4 cards dedicated to that. And then our main win con is going to be both her abilities and the Koth Vanguard. So once you understand this deck, you can understand why it does well, because it follows a lot of principles of good deck building. So if you're still a little bit newer to the game and you can either recreate this deck or find suitable replacements to slot in here, I think it'll be successful for you. All right, let's move on to the other deck that I built for her. Okay, here's the one that I'm calling my elite deck because it has masterpieces and mythics in it. It's really built around a kind of simple premise. It's built around this creature, Imodane the Pyro Hammer. And thank you to Kilroy and everybody else in Gaussmaster server who gave me the ideas and inspiration for this deck. Kind of took the idea and ran with it here. So why is this creature special? Well, it wasn't really a creature that I saw used much when it first came out, because I don't think there were a lot of cards for it to take advantage of until the last few sets that have come out. So it's a 12 mana 4/4 human knight. When a spell card you control deals damage to a creature, deal that much damage to your opponent's Planeswalker. And so that means we have to have a lot of cards in our deck that will deal damage to opponent Planeswalkers. So what do we got here? The first one that was suggested by Kilroy, I believe it was, Pyretic Rebirth. Pick one of the first 4 creature or Vanguard cards from your graveyard, then fetch that card. It gains half its mana rounded down. Deal X damage to each opposing creature. X is that creature's base mana cost. So that's where it synergizes with Imodane so well, because if your opponent has a bunch of creatures on the battlefield, that means that whatever you choose from your graveyard, if you choose the highest cost card, it's going to be doing tons of damage to your opponent via the creatures that it also is hitting. So could be a very solid board wipe, and then it gives you the added benefit of getting something out of your graveyard and filling it with a lot of mana. So really interesting card. It is a PM2 card, so it's not easy to come by. Speaking of other cards that are not easy to come by, this is Wheel of Fortune. One of the more interesting cards that come out of the PM2, I forget what it's called, but it's the pack that comes with Coalition Victory and Time Vault, and this is the third of 5 cards that come with it. It is a paid exclusive, so you do have to pay a lot of money to get that set of cards, but if you do, this one is a good one to pair with this deck. So each player discards all cards that can be discarded from their hand and draw 6 cards. For each card discarded this way, deal 3 damage to each opposing creature. You know, if your opponent has 6 cards in their hand and you have 6 cards in your hand, then you're just going to be dealing a bunch of damage to each creature, similar to Pyretic Rebirth, and you're going to be hitting your opponent for tons of damage in that way. And then, you know, It is a card that helps you maintain tempo because you're going to be discarding all the cards from your opponent's hand as well. So it's a little bit defensive in that way. Just got to be careful about when you're going to be casting it, because if it ends up as the first card in your hand and you have a bunch of cards you wanted to cast before it, then you'll be discarding those, unfortunately. So it's still a really good card. 15 mana. It's a little pricey, but it is a pretty solid card. Ghostfire Slice. The reason this card is in here is because it targets non-token supports. It's a random one, but it is a good card for dealing with supports that might be giving you a hard time, because it's not going to hit, simple supports or whatever. And then it can do a little bit of damage to your opponent's creature, which will help with Immodane. Deal 7 damage to a random opposing target if this card is not colorless that you destroy. This effect can affect Vanguard supports. Not the greatest card in most situations, but I think it has a place in this deck. Heartflame Duelist. So this is another card that I didn't see played much when it was first introduced to the game, but it is good because when a spell you control deals damage to opposing target, you gain that much life. So when you're dealing all that damage to all your opponent's creatures and to your opponent, you're just going to be gaining a bunch of life back too. So it does make this deck a little bit more resilient because you're doing things to keep yourself alive by gaining life. And it's not something that comes easily in mono red. So I think this is a good card to have around. Capricious Hellraiser. So this is one that's going to be copying spells from your graveyard and being able to cast them for free whenever this creature enters the battlefield. So if you're able to get a bunch of these in your hand and cast them off, then you're just going to be able to do a bunch of damage depending on what you get from your graveyard to play. Things like Season of the Bold are great. Spree 2, deal X damage to the first opposing creature into your opponent's Planeswalker. X is the number of cards in your exile. So this is a card that will just get more and more powerful the more you play it. So it's a good one for Capricious Hellraiser to copy from the graveyard and do damage with. With Immodane, you're going to be doing double the damage of whatever you do with Season of the Bold. So pretty nice little card in this deck. Blasphemous Act, another good one. At the beginning of your turn, if this card's in your hand, reduce this card's cost by X. X is the number of creatures in play, including their reinforcements. So if you're playing against a token heavy, this card will get cheaper and cheaper as you go. And then deal 15 damage to each opposing creature into your opponent's Planeswalker. So this can be dealing a massive amount of damage when Immodane is on the board, and you'll be getting tons of life back if the Duelist is also on the board. And then Leyline of the Guild Pact and Cryptex are just the best cards for mono walkers to gain mana with, I think. Especially her, who relies on having a lot of red gems on the board for her abilities to be more effective. You can see with everything going on with it why it does well. It's kind of funny. Sometimes the peasant deck does better than this elite deck. So it just really depends on what you're trying to do. This one was built on a simple premise of just doubling up on spell damage with Immodane. So it could probably be optimized even further to get even more reliable wins faster. But I just really wanted to share with you how you can synergize with your deck building along a simple theme and just go all in with it while still being able to handle most threats thrown at you. So those are my decks, and let's get into grades. Okay, let's start off with hit points. She's pretty middle of the road in terms of hit points, maybe a little bit below average depending on who you ask, but I'm just going to give her a C. Nothing so low that you're going to be nervous playing with her, but still, it might make you sprout a bead of sweat here and there. Mana spread. I think they're pretty okay. I don't have a big issue with her mana spread. She gets enough on her on-color matches that as long as you have a lot of red on the board, you shouldn't be starved for mana. So I'm going to give her a B. Her ability 1 is, to me, my favorite part about her. You have the potential to get a lot of mana from it. I just wish that there was a way to trigger this more than once a turn, but it's okay. It's still a pretty solid ability, so I'm going to give it a B+. Her ability 2, very average. Sometimes it helps you get out of a funky situation you're in, but most of the time you want to use your ability for other things, maybe spamming her first ability more. So I'm giving it a C. Ability 3 is good in theory, but again, that hard cap, you really want more out of a third ability, especially when her other abilities aren't bringing a ton to the table. I mean, they're fun, and this ability can be fun sometimes, but man, it would have been so much better if you can trigger it more than once a turn. It just makes it a little bit too balanced in the wrong direction for me. I think that it wouldn't have been like super great game breaking to be able to trigger it more than once a turn. But that's just how I feel about it. So I'm giving it a B-. It still can really help you win, help speeds up the damage done in games, but it just does a little less than I would have wanted it to. Her passive ability, it's fun. Again, it's a little bit limited in the fact that you need to cast something that has 9 or more mana, and it only works once a turn. And then you never know how much it's going to help you. You're playing things like, Demolition Field, Desolate Mire, Boombox, like I was showing on here, Pyromancer's Goggles, things like that. Then, yeah, it's going to help a lot with hopefully that sort of thing. So then it makes you kind of have to put a lot of cards that deal with the gems or activated or simple tokens and all that to be destroyed. So it definitely has a lot of function with it. So giving it a B-. Versatility, I think she's fairly versatile. You can do a lot of different things with her. Her abilities don't necessarily pull you in a specific direction. Her deck limits kind of assume that you're going to be putting a lot of spells in your deck. But, she can deal with a lot of different types of decks because her abilities don't necessarily rely on you casting spells. Although her second ability definitely relies on that. She's a little bit above average in versatility. So I'm going to give her a C+ there. Card utility. I don't think she does a lot to enhance the cards that you use other than, the activated and simple tokens, things like that, things that you want to destroy that are low shield. She does all right with that. But beyond that, she isn't doing a ton to elevate any other types of cards. So I'm going to give her a B- there. And then fun. I think that she can be fun. The problem is, though, the things that would make her really fun for me and would make things really go for her, they get capped off to once a turn. So if that wasn't the case, then I think that I would have rated her a lot higher than I end up doing here. But I still had a decent amount of fun playing with her. I didn't lose a whole lot when I was using these decks. So she can be solid, but I think she could have been more fun with a few simple tweaks. So I'm going to give her a B- there. And so what is my final grade for Chandra Hope's Beacon? It is a B-. So not a bad walker at all, but I don't think she's bringing enough to the table to justify picking her up over some of the red walkers I like a lot better. She doesn't bring a lot of things that are new to the table to make her something that you want to just play around with for fun. I think she's just above a middle of the road planeswalker, not even by much, really. So I think this is one for the completionists. I don't think you're going to be using her in a lot of different events because I just don't think that she is the best option for any event that you can think of, really. So, yeah, she's just going to kind of sit around in your collection gathering dust, I would think. I don't know. I could be wrong about that. There are some really neat things that you can do with her. Her passive ability and her first ability are probably the most unique things that you can bring to the table with her. But beyond that, I think if you're a new player, you're way better off grabbing a different mono walker that's on the high end of my Planeswalker tier list. So if you haven't given that a look-see in a while, you might want to go ahead and take a look at that. I still have to add more decks to my deck archive, but I did add a bunch of the Planeswalkers that have come out in the past year or so to my list of Planeswalker rankings, and you'll find a link to that in the description of this video and in all the videos that I've created in the past year or so. So we're all really looking forward to seeing what else Duskmourn brings to us. So we're still in the middle of spoiler season, and that means that Duskmourn will be dropping any day now. So I will be around for that. I really hope to have the time to live stream a lot on that day. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Anyway, thanks for checking this out. I'm glad that you appreciate my candid opinions on these walkers. Webcore, once again, thank you for Webcore. Thank you again for letting me preview this Planeswalker and never having an issue with what I say about these walkers, good or bad. So thumbs up to you for that. I'll buy you guys around if you're ever in the Bay Area. All right. See you guys next time.